Hello and welcome to 1010 Wins at 92.3 FM live on social. I'm Susan Richard and here's what's happening. We are talking one-on-one with the candidates for mayor of New York City, and today we're so pleased to welcome Democratic nominee Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks
Such a
for
pleasure
being
to be
here. I have 9 pages of questions, so let's dive in.
Let's dive straight in.
All right, so you are the front runner, and if the polls are correct, this is your race to lose. So that being the case, your opponents are seizing on a number of things that you've said, including your prior characterization of the NYPD, the use of the phrase globalize the intifada, and whether or not, people should use that phrase or not, as well as your stance on sex workers. You say you have evolved. Your critics say you're flip-flopping. So what would you say to somebody who says to you, will the real Zohran Mamdani please stand up?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I have to sit down for this radio interview. But I think that the thing to be clear is that my values, my commitment, my ideals, they have remained the same throughout my political career. They continue to be the things that animate me to do this kind of work. And in the course of that time, in looking to uphold and fulfill those values and ideals, and also looking to represent 8.5 million people who call this city home, there is sometimes something known as growth, something known as reflection or regret or apology. And I know that for someone like Andrew Cuomo, those are words that he tends to be allergic to. But that style of politics where one does not admit any difference or any change or any growth over time, it's also a style that I found New Yorkers want to leave in the past. And to your question about, or your point about rather being the front runner in this race, I'd say that, in some ways we're finding out what Andrew Cuomo felt like with less than 4 weeks to go to the primary. He was leading in the polls. We don't want to find out how he felt on primary night when we won that election by 13 points. And what I mean by that is we cannot look at these polls as if they are destiny. We cannot look at these votes as if they are owed to us. We have to earn them every single day. And so to me, this is still very much a race to be won, a race that every day I need to make sure I'm speaking to as many New Yorkers as possible across the 5 boroughs about our affordability agenda to take the most expensive city in the United States of America and make it affordable for everyone in this.
Okay, we are going to talk about that, and we have a lot of topics to talk about. I want to start with what has been one of the top stories today and certainly yesterday on 1010 Wins, the possibility of a ceasefire deal in Gaza. President Trump announcing that both Israel and Hamas have agreed to this phase 1, where Hamas would free the remaining hostages, dead or alive, in exchange for Israel releasing hundreds of prisoners, and then Israel would pull its troops back to a certain point. If this happens, they say they may even sign it as soon as today. Your thoughts?
I'm hopeful at the news of a possible ceasefire. I hope that it is lasting. I hope that it brings peace. And amidst that hope, also a recognition that it does not erase the tragedy that has taken hold over these past 2 years. A tragedy with Hamas's horrific war crime on October 7th and the Israeli government's horrific war crimes since then, leading to the genocide of Palestinians. And knowing that no matter this agreement, it will not make the rubble whole. It will not bring back entire bloodlines that have been wiped off the face of the earth. It will not bring back hostages who died in captivity. And yet we continue to have hope that this can actually address what has left so many New Yorkers in horror and in despair, and to do so in a manner that speaks to both these last 2 years and also that which preceded it.
Your statement on Monday on the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th Hamas terror attack was very quickly condemned by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. They accused you of acting as a mouthpiece for Hamas propaganda. They said, quote, by repeating Hamas's lies, he excuses terror and normalizes anti-Semitism. He stands with Jews only when they are dead. Shameful, end quote. So there are many Jewish New Yorkers and others who are worried about what you say and then about what you don't say on this issue. I'd like you to give you the opportunity to address that.
I am someone who has many critiques of the Israeli government. And amidst those critiques, I also know that the people that I'm actually accountable to, it's not the Israeli Foreign Ministry, but rather it's New Yorkers themselves, the 8.5 million people who call the city home. And on October 7th, I went to a vigil in Union Square held by Israelis for Peace, and I heard the words of a New Yorker whose aunt was killed by Hamas on October 7th, and the way in which it shattered her life. And then I heard the words of a Palestinian New Yorker who shared how his sister had been killed in the months following, and the ways in which this belief in universal human rights that so many of us share. It's grounded in a shared sense of humanity. And so often the desire to extend that humanity to all people, Israelis and Palestinians alike, is one that is then critiqued and condemned by institutions like the Israeli Foreign Ministry. When what we know is that to uphold that shared humanity is to actually listen also to the words of the hostage families themselves, who have said everyone for everyone. They have spoken for months about the fact that the desire for a ceasefire is wrapped in this mutuality, that the safety of the hostages, the safety of Palestinians is not something that can be disentangled from one another. And the importance for me to know that my responsibility is to lead this city, to work every day for the benefit of New Yorkers, and that when I'm asked to share my values, to share my ideals, to share my commitments, and those commitments not only extend to the belief in universal human rights everywhere across the world, but also they extend to ensuring that there's no place for anti-Semitism in this city, in this state, in this country, and that to root it out will take many forms. It will take increasing funding for hate crime prevention programs by 800%. It will take ensuring that Jewish New Yorkers do not have to fear when they go to their synagogues or their temples. Just the other day on Yom Kippur, I had a rabbi reach out to me asking if I could provide additional police protection outside of the synagogue because they were fearful after the horrific anti-Semitic attack in Manchester, England.
Right.
And so that's a call that I made, but that rabbi shouldn't have to call me. That should be something that should be built into the way in which we respond to these things. And I appreciated the governor in her response to that horrific act of anti-Semitism, saying that she was going to increase the New York State Police's relationship and orientation and approach to providing that kind of security on that day. And so these are the ways in which I will take action here in New York City to not only protect Jewish New Yorkers, but to celebrate them, to ensure that they understand they are a key part of the city, and doing so while holding on to the same beliefs in universal human rights.
So, because words matter, so you've used the word genocide. For many, that evokes images of the Holocaust. The phrase from the river to the sea seems to have different meanings for different people. So talk about those two phrases, from the river to the sea. What does that mean to you?
Well, I'll first just tell you about genocide. Genocide is a term that I'm using not as my own independent assessment, but rather a reflection of leading genocide scholars from across the world. These also include Israeli scholars themselves, including Amos Goldberg, Daniel Blattman. And these are the findings also of a number of United Nations experts. And I think the use of that term is one that is a reflection of these facts. And, you know, much has been made earlier. You were referring to it around the question of this phrase of globalize. And there's never been a question of whether I use that language. It's not language that I use. The question that was put to me is, what do I think of others that use that language? What do I think of the phrase itself? And, you know, I had shared the first time that I was asked about this, that I know that there are some who use this as a reference to a call to the end of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land. And that was what I first shared. And then in the time since then, I also spoke about the fact that when I won the primary, I shared that I knew that millions of New Yorkers care deeply about Israel and Palestine. I'm one of them. And my job in leading the city is to also wrestle deeper with differences of opinion, to reckon with the complexity of the nuance of it. And that means having even more engagement than ever before. And so I've had meetings with rabbis, with Jewish elected officials, Jewish community leaders. And it was in one of those meetings where one rabbi told me that that same phrase was one that brought, for her, memories back of bus bombings in Haifa, of restaurant attacks in Jerusalem. And the phrase left her with a fear that that violence could come home here to New York City. And in hearing that and in wrestling with that and the distance between these two things, I then said that this is language I would discourage. It's language that I would discourage, and what I would always try and refocus the conversation on is to have a language of clarity, which is what I seek to have, about the fact that this is grounded in a belief in universal human rights, and that we have to extend that to Palestinians as well. Because the other day, I sat with a number of Palestinian New Yorkers, and they were telling me about what this genocide has meant for their lives and those that they love. And there was a Palestinian New Yorker who lives in Bay Ridge. He told me how his son is in Gaza today, son and his wife and their children, and they can't get out and that the other day he got a phone call from his son who gave the phone to his grandkid. And the grandchild told the grandfather, who was in Bay Ridge at the time, "I'm hungry. I can't find any food." And speaking to the devastation of starvation that we see of so many people. And I kept listening to this man, and he looked at me and he said, "I spent decades working here in New York City to build a home in Gaza for my family. And then soon after October 7th, the Israeli military bombed that home into rubble, and it's gone." He said, "I lost my cousins. They were killed, and no one buried them. Their bodies were left out in the street, and they were eaten by dogs." And to reckon with that level of despair, it is immense. It will never leave him. And yet, my job is both not only to hope for a ceasefire, but also to seek to represent each and every New Yorker and hold the pain that they have suffered, and look to showcase a vision of humanity that speaks to all of us. And knowing that what unites us all in this city is that we are of this city. And this is a city for each and every person, be they Jewish, be they Palestinian, be they from wherever in the world, because we are a people that understand that the value of the city comes from the people that call it home.
Is in your characterization of Hamas a militant organization or a terrorist group?
I've called them a terrorist group. They committed a horrific war crime.
And do you believe that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state?
I've said that Israel has a right to exist. I have not said as a Jewish state, and that comes out of my belief as an American in the importance of the enshrining of equal rights in any constitution. And so if you were to ask me that question about Saudi Arabia or Israel, I'd say the same thing.
Okay.
It's a belief that any nation in the world should have equal rights. It's not a distinct and unique critique of the Israeli state, but rather a belief that equal rights have to be the building block of any state.
So whether it's a Jewish state, a
Muslim
state, a Christian
whatever
state.
Gotcha.
Gotcha.
And I think that's also what many people appreciate about being Americans, is that we don't have a hierarchy of citizenship.
You've said that you would divest New York City from any financial investment in Israel, correct?
I've said that I don't believe we should be purchasing Israel bonds, and that we should continue the practice of the current controller who allowed those bonds to lapse.
Okay, and so according to the Comptroller's Office, city pension funds are invested in companies, for example, that heavily invest in China. So is that an issue?
I think our pension funds should always be a reflection of our values, and the place where I draw a distinction is where we as a pension fund are buying bonds of a sovereign nation. And that is a unique practice that oftentimes we have only extended to the Israeli state.
Okay.
And I think we both have a fiduciary responsibility to the people of New York City, but also, as we've seen, a question of our values, of do we want to be supporting the actions of the Israeli state? And I don't think that that should take the form of purchasing these bonds.
Would you direct the NYPD to arrest Netanyahu?
I've said that I believe that this is a city of international law, and that the International Criminal Court has put forward a warrant for the arrest of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And they've also put forward warrants for others, including Vladimir Putin. And that I believe that New York City, in looking to live up to that value of international law, should uphold these warrants, but also should do so within the realms of laws that exist today.
And so
what I mean by that is we exhaust all of the legal possibilities in front of us to stand in compliance, while also understanding that I'm not Donald Trump, who's looking to make his own set of laws in order to fulfill my own desires.
So if a Hamas leader were just hypothetical to be given a diplomatic visa, be able to come here, they would not be able to come here at this point. But let's say, for example, Yasser Arafat, when he was head of the PLO, he visited New York. So if a Hamas leader came to New York, would you seek to arrest them?
It all comes back to the International Criminal Court. I've said that I'm looking to honor any of their warrants that they've put forward. So it's Putin, it's Netanyahu, it's whomever else. And also to do so in compliance with our own laws as well, looking to bridge this gap, but having our laws be the guide of that.
Okay. Affordability, that is the buzzword for this election. And let's tick off some of the things you want: a rent freeze for stabilized apartments, free bus service, free child care for kids 6 weeks to 5 years old, yes. City-owned grocery stores, a pilot program, one in each borough, 200,000 units of affordable housing over 10 years, all paid for by adding a 2% tax on anyone with an income over $1 million and having the top corporate tax rate to match that of New Jersey.
This is great.
Okay. Yeah. Did my research.
You got it.
None of that's doable without Albany,
Hmm.
right? So you've received the endorsements of the top legislative leaders and Governor Hochul. Conversations with them, because what happens if you don't get that? Then what's Plan B?
So I'd love to go through a number of these. Some of these are actually within the city's powers themselves. Freezing the rent for stabilized tenants. That's something the city can do and has done through the Rent Guidelines Board. Composed of 9 people, the mayor appoints all of them. Previous administration froze the rent 3 times. So that is firmly within the city's purview. The second is the pilot program of municipal-owned grocery stores, 1 in each borough. That's 5 grocery stores that cost $60 million. It's less than half of the cost the city is currently putting towards a program called City Fresh that subsidizes a number of corporate supermarkets across New York City.
Right, that already exists. So you would expand that? Is that?
I've talked about, and I've actually heard from a number of grocery store owners about how this program is one that is failing them, oftentimes providing subsidy for a competitor, but not, the equal application of that for the grocery stores in the neighborhood.
So why not just fix it?
Well, this, I think, is a fix. It's a fix to actually ensure that if we're putting money aside, that we are putting it aside for the delivery of cheaper groceries. As opposed to right now, we're putting subsidies aside. There's no guarantee that they employ union labor, no guarantee that they accept SNAP or WIC, no guarantee that they'll lower prices. It's just kind of a
But you
hope
could
for the
make
same.
that part of the deal.
And I think to me, I want to ensure that we are directly interacting with New Yorkers and able to guarantee those cheaper prices. So, but I give you these as 2 examples of things that the city can do on its own. But with Albany, it'll be critically important to work with Albany for the financing and funding of making buses free. That's around $700 million a year. The financing and funding of delivering universal childcare. That's about $5 or $6 billion. And I'm very excited that of all of the people in Albany, we've received the endorsements especially of Carl Hastie, who's the Speaker of the State Assembly, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the Majority Leader of the State Senate, and Governor Kathy Hochul. And as you know, in Albany, it's often described as 3 men in a room. In the past now, it's 2 women and a man in the room. But these are the 3 people who are helping to lead this state. They've not endorsed just my campaign, but also our affordability agenda. And, when Speaker Hastie was asked, which part of the agenda do you agree with, he said, all of the above. And it speaks to a partnership that we're actually building such that we can deliver on this agenda for New Yorkers. And we've seen that there's an interest in that. Governor Hochul has been interested in universal childcare before I was running for mayor. This is a real place where we could work together, unlike what it was like when Andrew Cuomo was leading the state, Bill de Blasio was the mayor. It seemed as if City Hall and Albany were consistently at odds. When City Hall wanted to deliver universal pre-K, they had to fight Andrew Cuomo to be able to do so. Now we can have a relationship that's built on understanding that we both have the same constituents, the people of New York City.
So you're very confident that
Yes.
that they're going to go for this.
I'm confident in that partnership, and I've also said time and again, look, I think the revenue proposals that you cited are the most straightforward and direct ways of raising this funds, and I am most married to the outcomes of this. So if someone were to provide a different set of funds, of a different revenue stream, whatever it may be, the most important thing is that we are funding the programs, not the manner in which we do so.
Okay. On your campaign website, you state that you want to, quote, shift the tax burden from overtaxed homeowners in the outer boroughs to more expensive homes in richer, whiter neighborhoods. When asked about that on NBC's Meet the Press, you said you're just stating what you see. Why inserting race into that in a policy statement? So I did a little digging, and there are reports from NYU's Furman Center from 2024, as well as the Community Service Society of New York from this past March that support what you're saying. But here's my question. Like, the voters shouldn't have to go do that research, right? So isn't it incumbent upon you to maybe give a little context and not just kind of drop a race bomb?
I think it is incumbent on me to give a little context, and I think to ensure that people understand that this is not a motivator for this proposal. The motivator for the proposal is to create a fair property tax system.
Okay,
and
so why insert race at all?
No, I think it's a description, rather, but one, as you've said, that also loses sight of the fact that there are a number of white homeowners today who are feeling the pain of a broken property tax system. And that's my job, to make that clear that you don't have to go to Community Service Society, you don't have to go to the Furman Center. And that is the way in which I communicate, whether through the website or in person or on the radio, is to make clear the actual motivation behind this, which is we have a broken property tax system, one that is unfair in the way in which it puts a burden on many homeowners, one that also compares luxury condos to moderately priced ones, pretends that they're the same, ones that looks at a apartment that was bought at 220 Central Park, that was at one point the most expensive apartment of $228 million, and assesses its value as less than $10 million. That's a broken property tax system. And my reflection is the necessity of me making that case to New Yorkers as opposed to leaving them feeling as if this is something that's motivated by a racial analysis of the city.
Right. So maybe on your website, they need to add some stuff. Just
Yes.
saying. Okay. Yeah, well, I do want to talk about public housing. 528,000 people living in NYCHA housing. Most people would agree public housing is a serious state of disrepair.
I agree.
I mean, look what happened with the Mitchell
Bronx,
houses.
yeah.
I mean, that scene where it's like, I mean, a chunk of the building
Yeah.
is just.
And we are so lucky that no one was injured.
Yes. I mean, that could have been a disaster. Cities like Houston, New Orleans, Kentucky, and Atlanta have actually worked to demolish public housing and move lower income families into private market apartments, then with vouchers, basically, a voucher program that are city subsidized. What do you think of something like that?
I think it's important that we continue to have public housing right here in New York City, but I don't disagree with what you said earlier, which is that the conditions within which hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers are living in right now are unacceptable. And we've seen assessments that NYCHA needs close to $80 billion in additional capital funding to deal with just the question of repairs. And yet we have a federal government that is, at the very least, completely uninterested in addressing any of these needs. Right now, Donald Trump's administration is too busy trying to kick 4 million Americans off of their health care to actually address this kind of a crisis in public housing. But the city has a role to play. And that's why I've said that we would double the funding we put aside for the preservation of public housing units across the city. And I say this also as someone who currently represents a number of NYCHA developments, including Queensbridge Houses, which is the largest public housing development in all of North America. And what I've heard from many of the residents at Queensbridge Houses and Ravenswood and Astoria Houses is a fatigue at the state of affairs and how they have continued for so many years. Listening to an 80-year-old woman explain to me that she has to take the stairs because the elevator still doesn't work. She has to use a hot plate because she still doesn't have her apartment in a state of good repair. And this is a key thing that it's not just going to be about funding, it's also going to be about focus. Do you actually focus on this and prioritize this within your administration? And when I've been in Albany, when we've advocated for additional money, one of the critiques has been, well, it's a black hole. If you put that money into NYCHA, we don't know where it's going, nothing changes. I think that's also the importance of putting specific things that you are funding. Right now, NYCHA has a clean energy project. It's a private-public partnership. They procured, I think, around 30,000 heat pumps, and they've started a pilot program in Woodside houses, where they found that by installing these heat pumps, they are increasing resident satisfaction to close to 90%. They are decreasing the actual energy emissions that are coming out of this same apartment, and they're seeing these savings part and parcel of a delivery of quality of life. Now, to me, what if we had that focus of thinking not just of amounts of money that New Yorkers can't quite fathom because of how large they are, and saying, this is money that's going to deliver these kinds of heat pumps. This is money that's going to deliver this is money that's going to deliver a transformed quality of life for NYCHA residents each step of the way while we are fighting for that close to $80 billion overall.
Okay. Another very hot topic on the campaign trail has been prostitution. Andrew Cuomo has been all over social media with the clip of you saying that you support decriminalizing prostitution. This was actually when the Assembly passed Bill A3355, which overturned a 1976 law that prohibited loitering for the purpose of prostitution. Basically, it's my understanding is because trans women were being profiled by police.
Yes.
All right, so I just want to play the clips.
Yeah.
Here's what you said then.
While this bill does not decriminalize sex work, I would like to register my support for such legislation, my eagerness for that debate, and for my fundamental belief that sex work is work.
All right, and then September 24th of this year.
I want to be extremely clear. I have never called for the legalization of prostitution.
So, sex work, prostitution, semantics?
No, I wouldn't say semantics in that the two clips are speaking about two different things. One is speaking about decriminalization. The other is speaking about legalization, right? These are two separate things. And I continue to uphold what I've said in the clip that you just played, which is that I've never been in support of legalization, and I'm not in support of legalization of prostitution. And what I do believe is that we have to ensure that our focus and our resources are always driven with the intent of providing safety for New Yorkers. And that means focusing on taking on sex trafficking, violence against women, ensuring that that is where we are putting our attention to, and returning to the practices of previous mayoral administrations that ended raids on sex workers, that ensured that district attorneys could focus on sex traffickers as opposed to these very workers. And what I'm speaking about, it is also something that you can find in the previous Manhattan District Attorney's policy, the current Manhattan District Attorney's policy, the current District Attorney of Brooklyn's policy, and the previous Manhattan District Attorney, Cy Vance, actually said that if you are focused on criminalizing these sex workers with the intent of assisting those on the margins, you actually find that the criminalization has the inverse effect. And these are the same findings of the United Nations Working Group on Women and Girls, the findings of Amnesty International, the World Health Organization, and they speak to the fact that the current approach we have, like that from Mayor Adams, where the NYPD is arresting sex workers and then after arrest providing them with resources and connections to ready-to-work employment opportunities and educational pathways, that is a broken system. We should be providing those kinds of services to sex workers at the first point of interaction, as opposed to prosecuting those same workers while ignoring the crisis of sex trafficking across the city.
We spoke with the National Organization for Women, and this is what they said to us. They said this would make New York City a major sex tourism destination that would allow men, quote, to explore the novelty of freely buying sex in a post-Me Too New York. They went on to say this could lead to criminal enterprises importing women and girls and trans individuals from economically and politically unstable countries using fraud, force, threats, and coercion. Local pimps use the same tactics.
So what I'm talking about is something that the previous administration did, and when they did it, they did not see these kinds of results, which is what this organization is speaking of. What we instead saw is a far more rational approach to delivering that safety, and furthermore, that this is being done in tandem with taking on sex trafficking, with ensuring that there is a zero tolerance for violence against women, and so much of what's being described is fundamentally against the law and something that we would ensure that we would hold anyone to account to, whether in this city today or in this city tomorrow.
Okay. Moving on to, let's talk about police and public safety. So you like Jessica Tisch? Would you keep her on as police commissioner?
I've said that I'm actively considering doing so. And the reason I've said that, and I've said that even through the primary, is because I deeply appreciate the swift and decisive action that she took in uprooting corruption at the upper echelons of the police department, and in her presiding over the decline in crime across the city, and a focus on ensuring that public safety is the outcome that we are actually driving towards. That's why I'm actively considering her.
You know, when we had Curtis Lee on Monday, he said the NYPD is cooking the books in terms of crime stats, that, you know, you've got all these porch piracy with Amazon packages, and they're not even taking police reports for that. And, you know, so he doesn't believe the stats that say that we're at all-time lows. What do you think?
Look, I look at those stats as a reflection of what's happening in this city. I trust them, and I also know that for New Yorkers, life is not just measured in statistics. When you ask a New Yorker, how are you feeling, they're not referring to CompStat to tell you the answer. They're going to tell you about their own experience. And a lot of times when I speak to New Yorkers and I ask them about safety, they'll tell me that they feel ill at ease in this moment. I ask them, where do you feel that most? They tell me public transit. And oftentimes what they're actually describing are not things that we might categorize as crime, but they are signs of a mental health crisis, of a homelessness crisis. And I know this because as someone who has ridden the subway for years, ever since I moved to the city at the age of 7, you know, you have many different speeds when you're sitting on the train, right? You have your headphones in, you're listening to music. You have the moment when you pause your music because you're aware of your surroundings. Then you have the moment when you take your headphones out, and perhaps you even have to intervene. And New Yorkers are tired of having to be on edge and aware at all moments of their life.
So more cops on the subway because you want to keep the number status quo.
I think we keep the numbers that we have, and I think the important thing is we allow the cops to do the job of focusing on serious crimes. We don't ask them to be the primary responders to the mental health crisis. And so what I do think we have to do is create a Department of Community Safety, which is a department that would have dedicated teams of mental health outreach workers, deploy them to the 100 subway stations with the highest levels of mental health crises and homelessness, so that we're actually meeting the needs of those New Yorkers and then bringing them out of the subway. Meanwhile, police officers would be able to focus more on serious crimes. In 2020, the response time for officers was closer to 10 minutes. Today, it's closer to 16 minutes. Our clearance rates are still less than 50%. And part of this is because we're asking those same officers who are supposed to respond to a 911 call about a shooting to also respond to 200,000 mental health calls a year. Right? The number of 911 calls have gone up by 37% in the last decade. It's just untenable to ask cops to do all of these things. And we look elsewhere in the country, there are examples of police departments that took mental health out of the department's purview. In doing so, they reduced the number of calls they had to deal with by 20%.
Where?
This was in Eugene, Oregon. And what they saw is that of the 24,000 mental health calls, that new approach was able to deal with all but 311 without police assistance. For the 311, they needed police assistance, they called. That's the same approach we would take, where we stop saying cops have to be the first person to pick up the phone, to head to the address when the issue is that of mental health or the issue is that of homelessness. That it actually has to be something where we call them when we need them, but we let them do their job.
All right, but cops respond to domestic violence calls.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Democratic socialism.
Come on, I was waiting for this.
I know. We have
It
to,
took you
that's
long
the
enough.
big finale.
Yeah.
All right, so everybody's talking about that. Cuomo calling it and you dangerous. Discuss.
Well, look, I think that Andrew Cuomo would describe anything as dangerous that's not him leading this city, because so much of what animates his politics is just his own ambition. I don't know actually what he believes or what he's fighting for beyond himself. And I'll be happy and direct to New Yorkers that, yes, I am a democratic socialist. And what that means to me are the words of Dr. King from decades ago. He said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism. There must be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country.
All right, but I want to go deeper.
Let's go.
I want to go deeper than that. What does it mean to you beyond that? And what does it look like in a Mamdani administration, aside from free buses, city-run grocery stores, and freezing the rent?
I love it when you cite the platform. For me, it looks like city government's understanding that it is our responsibility to ensure that every New Yorker has what they need to live a dignified life. Not what they need for what they would like or what they would want, but what they need that is necessary for that dignity. And I'll give you an example. We believe in New York City and in much of this country that every child deserves to have an education, K through 12, public schools. But we don't believe that every child deserves to have childcare prior to that point. So the same idea is not being fully applied, and what we have are families being priced out of the moments before they can actually enroll into school, where we have families that if they can't cough up $22,500 a year, they may not have childcare. The other day, I was on the M57, the slowest bus in New York City, travels at a speed of 4.9 miles an hour. I'm sitting there, and this woman behind me starts talking to me. She's a city worker. She tells me she has 2 kids. The only way she can afford to live in the city is that she has an 86-year-old grandmother who's taking care of those kids. And she said she's terrified of the days when her grandmother is feeling sick. She has to go to the doctor. She doesn't know what she can do beyond calling out sick from work herself. And so I give this to you as an example of my belief in universal childcare is part of extending the already existing belief in how we treat K through 12. My belief in making buses fast and free is because we think that public transit is for the public, and yet $2.90 is now out of reach for 1 in 5 New Yorkers. The reason I want to freeze the rent is that I think that housing is a human right. So these are all connected to the question of dignity. Do you need this to live a dignified life? We know that people need food, need housing, need transit, need education. That, to me, is non-negotiable. New Yorkers should not be priced out of that.
So you're not talking, I mean, you get that we're a capitalist society.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
you know, communism, socialism, capitalism, these are economic models, right, at their core. They're not a political system. Communism has become something else as a political system. So you get that we're a capitalist society. That's what we are. You're not looking to, like, overturn the whole...
No, what I'm looking to do is bring more dignity to the lives of New Yorkers. And I think that when you do so, you're not just fighting for tenants and bus riders and parents of a young child. You're also fighting for small businesses who are currently being faced with far more regulation than the most profitable corporations in the country, right? You're trying to ensure that that aspiration that animates that business is one that can be fulfilled. And I don't see that at odds in any way with the ability for us to deliver that same dignity to New Yorkers' lives. And I would say I wouldn't be the first democratic socialist to lead this city, because what we've seen is actually so much of what Andrew Cuomo describes as dangerous is just from the fact that he doesn't actually know the history of the city and the people who've led it. And even Curtis Lewa has said this, that we've had socialists who've led the city and we've been fine.
All right, let's talk about Donald Trump.
Oh, come on.
What are you going to do if he sends in the National Guard? What do you do if he cuts off funding to the city?
The first thing is we have to stop treating everything that he says as if it's already the law just by virtue of him saying it. He is just like any other person in this country. He's subject to the laws that we have in this country. And so when he threatens to suspend $18 billion in infrastructure grants, that is something that we actually can use the law and the legal tools to push back on. Because what we see is that this is not a fight between Donald Trump and myself. It's not a fight between Donald Trump and Chuck Schumer, even though we know he's using this as retribution for Democrats holding the line on trying to get health care back for Americans. He is attacking New York City, the fabric of the city, the jobs that this infrastructure program would actually create, the fact that this is one of the most used rail passage in the entire country, and there are many who are stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic because of the lack of this kind of infrastructure. That's what he's attacking. And what we've seen in California is when Donald Trump has tried to withhold federal funding, the attorney general there went to court, and they estimated that for every dollar they spent in legal fees, they recovered more than $30,000 in federal funding that would have otherwise been lost. So you use every tool, you fight back, and also you make it clear that Donald Trump is using the National Guard as a political tool to try and intimidate Democrats across the country, especially in cities that he thinks most often about. It's not that he's concerned with crime. If he was, he'd be thinking about the Republican governors of the 8 out of 10 top states with the highest levels of crime in the country. I agree with Commissioner Tisch, who said directly to the Trump administration, we don't need the National Guard here. We have the NYPD. They are the ones who will be in charge of keeping New York safe, and I agree with that.
All right. I wish we could talk for another hour. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. This is a pleasure.
Great. And coming up on Monday, same place, we'll be here with Andrew Cuomo on Monday, October 13th at 10:30. So do join us then. Thank you so much again.
Looking forward. Thank you.